the chief guest, Vice Chairman, University Grants Commission, the guest of honor, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Caledonia, the Director of the Center for Gender Studies, distinguished guests, members of the Center for Gender Studies, University of Caledonia, faculty, administrative staff, and students. It is indeed a great pleasure and a privilege to deliver a keynote for this conference on gender disparities, organized by the Center for Gender Studies, University of Caledonia, on this perennially relevant and persistent topic. It is a subject that has continued to challenge all of us as academics, advocates, and activists, as pointed out by the Vice Chancellor a few minutes ago. Now, before I proceed, I would like to make a slight clarification because historically, actually, it was not my idea to start the Center for Gender Studies at the University of Caledonia, although I was the founding member. It was Professor Amunugama, the then Vice Chancellor's idea. I must say I was being a pest because I was constantly demanding, along with some other academics, we were constantly demanding a gender policy for the university. So I think to fob us off, he kind of said, okay, you go and start this center. So just a historical clarification there. Now, when the director of the CGS UK, Dr. Anusha Idrisinger, invited me to give this lecture, I thought it may be timely to briefly revisit our understandings of the length and breadth and depth of the concepts of gender and gender disparities in feminist scholarship. I'm sorry to say this may be disappointing for some people because I warn you it is going to be somewhat of a theoretical keynote. One reason for this, one reason for me to take up this subject is the multitude of theories on gender that have come into being, as well as the popularization of some gender concepts, sometimes quite indiscriminately and erroneously in the collective public imagination. In the late 1970s, when I first became aware of gender issues, any allusion to gender had to be clarified in relation to the concept of sex. Life has changed drastically since then, and these days references to gender can be found in poverty assessments, in memes, in politics, in algorithms, in family interactions, in transitional justice processes, etc., especially if you choose to look for it. In fact, as feminist and gender scholars today, we tend to take gender as a given. But what exactly do we take as given? This keynote then is a reflection on the pertinent assumptions, historical evolution, and current understanding of gender disparities, as well as the significance of it for research, teaching, training, advocacy, activism, and action. Let me begin by articulating the breakdown of the modest questions that are fueling this conference. What do we mean by gender? And what do we mean by gender disparities? Now, you will agree with me that gender is a conflated, if not complicated word. So I hope that you will bear with me while I trace the term theoretically according to my current epistemological standpoint. Before the turn of the 21st century and the onset of the postmodern or even the post-postmodern ethos, scholars and theorists were seen to accept gender as an ontological fact, or in other words, as a fact of reality, or an analytical category founded on the socially constructed binary between the two sexes of men and women, and as the principal division or grouping or stratification in societies. Some of you may remember that gender was often used interchangeably with the idea of sex. Anne Oakley, in a groundbreaking text in 1972, Sex, Gender and Society, discusses how the biological differences of men and women are augmented and polarized through socially constructed differences in Western cultures, to the extent to which that there is a sex and gender binary, which in turn can lead to material, discursive, and normative inequalities. For sociological feminists in particular, Nancy Chodorov, Sylvia Wolby, and Stanley Van Wise, etc., gender was related to the values and norms, behaviors, and roles of social conditioning and social construction, or we can sometimes see this in sex role theory. Simone de Beauvoir, as far back as in 1949, summarizes her thinking in her famous quotation, I quote, "One is not born, but rather one becomes a woman," end quotation. Moreover, Moira Gatens points out that the male and female bodies have been attributed differing social value and significance, which cannot help but have a distinctive effect on male and female consciousness. Expanding the idea of social construction further, West and Zimmerman suggest that gender is, and I quote once again, a complex of socially guided, perceptual, interactional, and micropolitical activities that cast particular pursuits as expressions of masculine and feminine, within quotations, natures. The word nature is enclosed in citation marks to indicate that it too is a socially constructed concept. Thus, gender is argued to be located in activities or a series of acts, and at this point not considered a possession of individuals, giving rise to the idea that you can actually do gender. This notion of gender performativity, then, in terms of how individuals either conform or reject certain scripts of gender, though not always consciously, has been qualified by queer theorist Judith Butler, and I quote, "Performativity is a matter of reiterating or repeating the norms by which one is constituted," end quote. Yet it does not necessarily follow that individuals will always conform to what is socially and culturally expected of their biological sex. For more politically inclined feminists and for feminist activities, gender signifies interactions, relations, ideologies, and politics between and amongst people in the family, in institutions, and in socio-cultural structures. For instance, for Jill Matthews and Rowena Cornell, gender consists of an order emanating from gender relations between individuals. They argue that this gender order is an outcome of human practice or agency, and similar to the concept of an economic order. For Matthews, a gender order could be egalitarian, could be matriarchal or patriarchal, and always subject to resistance as well as conformity, contestation as well as acceptance. In recent times, the politics of gender as identities and identifications has come to the forefront. In particular, gender has been expanded, transformed, and faceted to incorporate more than the two dominant sexes or genders. For example, the Buginis, a culturally ethnic group in Indonesia, have historically conformed to more than two sexes or genders. Aside from the Makunari and the Oroane, the Buginese society identifies Kalabai, transgender males, and Kalalai, transgender females, as well as Bisu. Bisu is considered a fifth gender, which can embody all genders or none of them, in the sense that it transcends gender. Thus, today we talk of gender variance, not only women, men, cisgender, transgender people, but also gender neutral and gender fluid, amongst a wide spectrum or even a scalar of sex and gender identities and identifications. Even though Butler in 1990 says that gender performativity is not a matter of choosing of which gender one will be today, it could be argued that the concept of gender fluidity in the 21st century is one that provides ample space for maneuvering one's manifest identity and identifications. So not only do we see gender identities and identifications as changing according to geographical locations and time periods, ethnicity, religion, as well as age, ability, and disabilities, but also that we ourselves are performing and playing out these identities and identifications according to individual perceptions, desires, and capacities. Now, as delineated up to now, scholarly work has focused on gender not only as an answer, but also as a question, not only as an effect, but also as a cause, not only as a given, but much more as an execution, not only as social, but as individual as well, and not only as binary, but as a spectrum or even a scalar. But as noted earlier, with the pervasiveness of postmodernism and academic, if not popular, self-reflexivity in the 21st century, gender has come under extensive deliberation from an epistemological standpoint. As scholars began to look more and more at how knowledge is socially and culturally constructed, gender has also become understood as an epistemological tool or strategy of and for knowledge and meaning making. From unmindfully conflating gender as ontology, gender as part and parcel of reality, and gender has been used mindfully as a theoretical concept to frame reality for various epistemological purposes of knowledge making. Questions began to be asked as to how far our research realities construct our assumptions and understandings of gender, and in turn, how far our assumptions and understandings of gender assemble our research realities. In other words, as gender scholars and researchers, how far do we look out for gendering in our data? Discover gender as already out there in reality. It's a kind of an inductive relationship. And on the other hand, how far do we gender our data or apply gender frames to reality, a deductive relationship? Moreover, how far is this cyclic relationship of induction and deduction one of self-reflexivity? Not in a superior self-indulgent or judgmental way, but as a process of creating academic depth and validity that is descriptive, interpretive, theoretical, generalizable, and evaluative, as proposed by Joseph Maxwell. Consequently, it becomes important to consider our epistemological assumptions further. One critical epistemological assumption is that of a homogeneous, stable, gendered subject, frequenting modernist theories and writings on gender identity. Yet this subject or analytical frame has now been dismantled and deconstructed to show that there can be no sine qua non or essential identity or identification based on gender by intersectional theorists such as Kimberly Crenshaw, who maintains that gender intersects with other crosscuts, dimensions, and stratifications within identity in multiple and complex ways. This includes gender, ethnicity, class, religion, ability, disability, and so on. At the same time, gender is also understood to intersect with other dimensions that are outside identity, such as development, globalization, poverty, technological transformation, conflict, migration, and so on, to produce complex intersectional subjects. The influence and confluence of these interconnected facets of existence can alleviate or exacerbate or compound identity experiences of disparities, of privilege, of oppression, of vulnerability, sometimes allowing for the play of all. And this may well subvert the political aspirations of gender, given the wide range of intersecting interests and politics of individuals. Consequently, the historical difficulty experienced in finding permanent commonalities or building secure collectives, or even political unity based on gender identities can be understood as one of a reality that do not match its theory, or a mismatch between ontology and epistemology. Therefore, we can no longer speak of Therefore, we can no longer speak as political subjects, but more in terms of subject positions or identifications. I think I will have a little more time to highlight one more epistemological frame involving gender research, that of the dichotomous understanding of the world. You may remember that early gender research approached reality as constituting sets or pairings of either or, such as male, female, self or other, reason, emotion, normal, deviant. Now, these essentialist, bipolar, and mutually exclusive, these were essentialist, bipolar, and mutually exclusive. And one of these pairings is often culturally valued over the other. Such thinking in dichotomies can be traced back to the 17th century French philosopher René Descartes, who proposed his philosophy of knowledge based on the idea of a fundamental difference between the mind and the body. And if we consider fundamental examples of dichotomies of binary thinking within gender studies, then there is that of the sex-gender dichotomy or binary referred to earlier, with the underlying presumption that the differences between men and women are self-evident, are natural, polarized, and unchangeable. Today, these two have been epistemologically recast as inclusive, diverse, fashioned, and variable. Similarly, the concept of gender equality is hinged on the epistemological process of comparing and contrasting gender differences to determine inequalities. This has also been reconsidered, given that gender equality has often been discussed in ways that made men the standard of comparison or the norm, while women were explained as a difference. Rarely was gender inequality contemplated in ways that acknowledged or constructed the disadvantages posed to men or other gender identities, or other gender identity groups, as pointed out by the Vice-Chancellor earlier, until the advent of men's studies and the notions of masculinities argued by theorists such as Cornell. Today, the concept of gender disparities is one that can be argued to allow for individualities, commonalities, similarities, inequities, and disparities in equal measure. Thus, as far as research is concerned, the concept of gender disparities can be argued to be a semantic term with highly contested meanings, a theoretical concept for application and generalization, a tool of analysis to frame reality from a gender perspective, an epistemology or a way of constructing knowledge and meaning, and an ontology or an understanding of reality. Thank you very much.